And welcome back to our special post-election edition of the Correspondents. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, you know, by now it's pretty obvious to anyone here and around the world that elections do have consequences, particularly if you happen to be the sitting president. So how does a Donald Trump presidency affect the legacy of the first African-American president? To help us sort through that, I'm joined here in Washington by one of my friends, someone who's been covering this president for 8 years, White House correspondent Cindy Saine. Thank you so much for coming to join us about this. You know, Cindy, whatever your opinions may be about this president, you know, he has been quite a significant and a historic president by any measure. Rolling Stones magazine called him the most successful president ever. How is President Barack Obama likely to be written about and talked about in our history books?
Well, Mil, I had been preparing a story on his legacy ahead of the elections, and I talked to several different presidential historians, and most of them agreed that as the first African-American president, and his family in the White House, Michelle Obama, who is so beloved, has higher approval ratings even than President Obama, and the two daughters growing up there, scandal-free, and that the images have
scandal-free. You're right.
Exactly, and just as an African-American family in the White House, shattering what is it, more than 200 years of white male dominance there.
Sure.
So I think that is something that will live on, and it seems that Americans, even if they didn't like his policies, have a lot of respect for the president and his first family.
He will be remembered, Cindy, for rescuing us from the worst recession in recent memory, for Obamacare, for a lot of things, for actually promoting the whole idea that we are responsible for climate change. How much of that changes, though, under a Donald Trump presidency? Does he run the risk of losing so much of what he is going to be remembered for?
I think he does, Mil. When he was running for president, he said that he wanted to be a transformational president, along the lines of Ronald Reagan, the former Republican president. And I asked some of these historians, was he transformational? Some conservatives thought that he was, although they thought that he had gone too far on gay marriage, on immigration, on things like that, and that there was a backlash against that in the country, which we may have been seeing with Donald Trump being elected and so getting so many white votes. So some thought that, you know, the president did want change, but it might have been too radical too soon and without bringing all of the people along with him. So some are, of course, worried that perhaps gay marriage could be reversed, that immigrants should be deported, depending on where you stand. Some people, of course, are very concerned. And I think one of the first things that Donald Trump and the Republican majority in Congress will go at is health care, so-called Obamacare, which they may be able to now repeal. But then, of course, the question, what's going to stand in its place? What's going to happen to all those people?
What happens to those 20 million people who now have health insurance that didn't have it prior to President Obama? Could that become perhaps an overreach by the Republicans? You know, that could make them very unpopular.
I think it could, and I think that they're going to have to perhaps proceed with a bit of caution. It's easy to talk about things on the campaign trail, sure, but once people have something, then it's very difficult to take it away from them.
I can't imagine a deeper contrast between these two men, particularly in their ways of dealing with being in a tough spot, for example. We know after that first face-to-face meeting, everybody had, you know, like very good words to say about President-elect Donald Trump and President Obama for being so dignified in the face of someone who actually he's been at odds with for a long time. How did that go in your mind? How did that first transitional image of both presidents strike you?
Right. As the press secretary, Ernest, said afterwards, it was not as awkward as many had feared. Of course, we weren't in the room. We don't know what they actually said to each other. But President Obama said he talked at length about staffing the White House. Because, of course, Donald Trump has never held public office. And it takes hundreds of qualified people to staff the White House, people with security clearances. And so I think the president was trying to explain just the sort of the scope and the magnitude of the job that Donald Trump is now going to be up to. And just to my personal mind, Trump seemed a bit awestruck by his surroundings. He seemed much more humble and had nice things to say about President Obama. I think it's also starting to dawn on him as the rest of the country.
The gravity of the situation is starting to come down on him. I mean, what does he do next? I guess I'm worried that now that he's becoming a little bit more moderate, at least he's trying to appear more moderate, that he could alienate some of his base there who probably don't like the fact that he called Obama a very good man.
Right. I think we'll have to wait and see, especially watching now who he's going to appoint to this very, very important job of Secretary of State and other positions, as to see, is he going to have some of traditional Republican establishment where I think many here in the U.S. and abroad would breathe a bit of sigh of relief?
Elections do have consequences, and one of the big consequences is Donald Trump is likely to end up naming 2 Supreme Court justices.
Yes, that's right. And the Democrats sort of face the choice: are they going to go into complete opposition as the Republican
Or do we just let them sort of go along and say, and go ahead, see what you can do?
Right. And there's some things like infrastructure projects that Democrats actually would like, and they have indicated, some of them, Nancy Pelosi in the House and others, they would be willing to work together. But then some others say, okay, if you give him some victory on that, you're going to give him more political capital to do things like deport people that we don't want.
I know I have to wrap it very quickly. Have you figured out what's going to happen to Michelle's vegetable garden?
Well,
does anybody know?
She tried to make it permanent by putting some concrete structure in there, so we'll see.
Keep us informed. That is our program for this week. My thanks to our White House correspondent, Cindy Saine. Good talking with you as always. And of course, Cindy and all our correspondents will be busy doing their best to keep all of us informed as we go through this historic transitional period for this country. Until then, stay up to date with the latest trends and developments around the world at voanews.com. You can also watch this and our other shows on our website. Click on the Watch tab on the upper right. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mil Arcega. For now, so long from Washington.